My name is Sarah, and I'm 26 years old. You won't believe what my family did to me after my grandmother's funeral. While I was grieving, my own parents and brother conspired to write me out of my inheritance. The house my grandmother promised would be mine. What they didn't know was that I had been recording everything, and I had other plans that would expose their greed and get me exactly what I deserved. But they underestimated me completely. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from, and let me know what you would have done in my situation. I have a story about the day I discovered my parents wrote me out of their will to give everything to my unemployed brother. What they didn't know was that I had other plans. Let me start from the beginning so you understand just how deep this betrayal goes. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. While my older brother Jake spent his 20s partying and jumping from job to job, I was working 2 part-time jobs to pay for my nursing degree. Every family gathering, every holiday dinner, I was the one helping in the kitchen while Jake played video games in the basement. My grandmother Rose was the only one who really saw me. She lived in this beautiful Victorian house that had been in our family for 3 generations. When I was little, she would sit me on her porch swing and say, "Sarah, honey, this house has strong women's energy. Someday it's going to be yours." I spent every summer there helping her with the garden, learning her recipes, listening to stories about our family history. When she got sick during my senior year of college, guess who moved in to take care of her? Not Jake, who lived 10 minutes away. Not my parents, who were too busy with work. Me. I deferred my final semester to become her full-time caregiver. For 8 months, I bathed her, cooked her meals, drove her to doctor appointments, and held her hand through chemotherapy sessions. Jake visited maybe twice. My parents came by once a week for an hour, usually to ask if Grandma Rose needed anything from the store. During those quiet evenings, Grandma Rose would squeeze my hand and whisper, "Don't worry, sweetheart. The house will be yours. I've already talked to the lawyer. You're the one who deserves it." She passed away on a Tuesday morning in March. I was holding her hand when it happened. The funeral was beautiful. The whole family came out to pay their respects to the woman they had basically ignored for the last year of her life. But that's when things started to get weird. 3 days after the funeral, my dad called a family meeting. We all gathered in my parents' living room: Mom, Dad, Jake, and me. Dad cleared his throat in that serious way that meant business. "Well, kids, we need to talk about Grandma Rose's estate." I felt a warm flutter of anticipation. Finally, I would have a home of my own. No more tiny apartment with paper-thin walls. No more struggling to make rent while finishing my nursing degree. Dad pulled out some official-looking papers. The will. Reading is scheduled for next week, but I wanted to prepare everyone. There are going to be some surprises. Jake leaned forward with interest. This was probably the most attention he had paid to family business in years. "What kind of surprises?" I asked. Mom and Dad exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. "Well," Dad continued, "it turns out Grandma Rose changed her will about 6 months ago. She wasn't thinking clearly toward the end. You know how the medication affected her mind?" My heart started pounding. "What do you mean she changed it?" "The house is going to Jake." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt dizzy. "What?" Jake was grinning now. "Really? The whole house?" "The whole house," Dad confirmed. "And Sarah, you're getting her jewelry collection and some savings bonds, about $15,000 total." I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. 8 months of caring for her. 8 months of putting my life on hold. 8 months of promised conversations about my house and when you inherit this place. "That doesn't make sense," I finally managed. She told me dozens of times that the house would be mine. She said she had already talked to the lawyer. Mom reached over and patted my hand in that condescending way that made my skin crawl. "Honey, I know she said things, but old people sometimes make promises they can't keep. Jake needs the house more than you do. He's struggling to find his path, and this will give him stability. Struggling to find his path? My voice was getting louder. He's 28 years old and hasn't held a job for more than 6 months. I'm the one who took care of her. Sarah, don't be selfish, Dad said sternly. Family takes care of family. Jake will let you visit anytime you want. Jake nodded magnanimously. Yeah, totally. You can come by whenever. I looked around the room at my family. My parents nodding like this made perfect sense. Jake already planning his new life. Everyone acting like this was normal and fair. That's when I realized something that would change everything. But what? I discovered next would make this betrayal look like child's play. The will reading was even worse than I imagined. I sat in that stuffy lawyer's office wearing my only black dress, the same one I had worn to Grandma Rose's viewing. My family was all there, plus my Uncle Tom and Aunt Linda, who had driven in from 3 states away. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was ancient, probably knew my grandmother personally. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. The last will. And testament of Rosemary Thompson, dated September 15th of last year. September. That was only 2 months after I had moved in to care for her. 2 months after she had held my hand and promised me the house for the 100th time. As Mr. Peterson read through the legal language, I felt like I was watching a car crash in slow motion. The house. My house. The house where I had spent every summer, where I had nursed my grandmother through her final months, was going to Jake. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was watching my family's faces. My parents weren't surprised. Uncle Tom and Aunt Linda weren't surprised. They were all nodding along like they had heard this before. That's when it hit me. They all knew. This wasn't a surprise to anyone except me. After the meeting, as we stood in the parking lot, I confronted them. How long have you all known about this? My mother looked uncomfortable. Sarah, honey. How long? Uncle Tom stepped forward. Your grandmother talked to all of us about her decision a few months ago. She felt that Jake needed the stability more than you did. You're young. You have your nursing career ahead of you. You'll be fine. She never talked to me about changing her mind. Well, Aunt Linda said with a shrug, maybe she didn't want to upset you while you were caring for her. The cruelty of that statement took my breath away. They had all participated in lying to me for months. While I was changing my grandmother's bedpans and sleeping on her uncomfortable couch to make sure she wasn't alone, my entire family was conspiring behind my back. Jake had the audacity to put his arm around my shoulders. Look, sis, I know you're disappointed, but this works out better for everyone. I can move in right away, and you don't have to worry about property taxes and maintenance and all that boring stuff. I shrugged away from him. Move in right away? Yeah, I'm thinking this weekend. The house has been empty for 2 weeks already. 2 weeks? I stared at him. Grandma Rose died 2 weeks ago, and you're already planning to move into her house this weekend. My mother intervened quickly. Sarah, you're being dramatic. The house needs someone living in it. Empty houses deteriorate quickly. That evening, I drove to Grandma Rose's house, or what I still thought of as her house, though apparently it belonged to Jake now. I had kept the key she gave me, and I needed to say goodbye properly. I walked through the rooms where I had spent the happiest moments of my childhood, the kitchen where she taught me to make her famous apple pie, the living room where we watched old movies on Sunday afternoons, the bedroom where I had slept beside her during the worst nights of her illness, when she was scared and didn't want to be alone. In her bedroom, I found her jewelry box, the one that was apparently my inheritance now. $15,000 worth of jewelry and savings bonds. For 8 months of my life, and a lifetime of promises. I opened the jewelry box and found a letter with my name on it, written in Grandma Rose's shaky handwriting. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I hope my final wishes have been honored. I want you to know that this house, every brick and board of it, is meant for you. You are the granddaughter who chose love over convenience. You sacrificed your own plans to care for me when no one else would. I have left instructions with Mr. Peterson that the house should go to you, along with all my savings. Jake will receive the jewelry collection, as he has always admired my vintage pieces. Never doubt that you were the light of my final years. All my love, Grandma Rose. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking. The will Mr. Peterson had read was completely different from what my grandmother had written in this letter. Someone had changed it. Someone had manipulated a dying old woman into rewriting her will. But I was about to discover something that would make this betrayal look like nothing. I couldn't sleep that night. The letter from my grandmother kept running through my mind. She had specifically mentioned leaving the house to me and the jewelry to Jake, but the will had said exactly the opposite. Something was very wrong. The next morning, I called Mr. Peterson's office and made an appointment. I needed to understand what had happened. "Miss Thompson," Mr. Peterson said when I arrived, "I'm so sorry for your loss. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman." "Mr. Peterson, I found something in my grandmother's jewelry box that I need to ask you about." I showed him the letter. He read it carefully, his bushy eyebrows drawing together in confusion. "This is very strange. This letter describes a completely different will than the one I read yesterday." "What do you mean?" "Well, according to this letter, your grandmother intended to leave you the house and your brother the jewelry collection. But the will I have on file shows the opposite arrangement." My heart was pounding. "Is it possible someone changed the will?" Mr. Peterson was quiet for a long moment. "Miss Thompson, I've been practicing law for 42 years, and I've seen all kinds of family disputes over inheritances. What I'm about to tell you must stay confidential until we can investigate further." I nodded. "Your grandmother did come to see me in September, but she wasn't alone. Your father accompanied her to that appointment. He said your grandmother was confused and needed help making decisions about her estate." "My father was there?" "Yes. And he presented me with a handwritten note from your grandmother saying she wanted to change the beneficiaries. The handwriting looked authentic, so I prepared the new will accordingly. I felt sick." "Do you still have that handwritten note?" "I do. It's in your grandmother's file." He pulled out a folder and showed me a piece of paper. "Here it is." I stared at the note. It was definitely my grandmother's handwriting, but something felt off about it. "Mr. Peterson, my grandmother had arthritis in her hands. By September, she could barely hold a pen for more than a few minutes. This note is too long and too neat for her to have written it in one sitting." He examined the note more closely. "No, now that you mention it, the handwriting does seem unusually steady for someone with advanced arthritis. Is there any way to prove the note was forged? We would need a handwriting expert, and even then, it's difficult to prove forgery when the person who allegedly wrote it is deceased." He paused. "However, there is something else. Your father made the appointment very quickly after your grandmother's previous visit, the one where she established the original will, leaving everything to you." "How quickly?" 3 days. And between you and me, your grandmother seemed uncertain during that second visit. She kept looking to your father for confirmation about her decisions. I left Mr. Peterson's office with my head spinning. My father had manipulated my dying grandmother into changing her will, but I needed proof. That afternoon, I went back to Grandma Rose's house. Jake had already started moving his stuff in. There were boxes everywhere and his clothes hanging in her closet. It made me physically ill. I went to my grandmother's desk, where she kept all her important papers. Maybe there was something there that could help me understand what had happened. In the bottom drawer, underneath a stack of old Christmas cards, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a practice sheet, the kind you make when you're trying to copy someone's handwriting. There were dozens of attempts at my grandmother's signature, getting progressively better. And at the bottom of the page, in my father's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "Rose Marie Thompson wishes to leave her house to her grandson Jake Thompson." I took photos of everything with my phone. The practice sheet, the Christmas, cards with my grandmother's real signature for comparison, everything. But that wasn't all I found. Hidden behind the practice sheet was a printed email from my father to Jake, dated just 1 week after my grandmother's death. "Jake, everything went according to plan. The old lady never suspected anything. Sarah's too naive to question the I will, and even if she does, it'll be too late. The house will be yours by the end of the month. Don't screw this up like you've screwed up everything else. This is your chance to finally have something valuable. Dad." Jake had replied, "Thanks, Dad. I knew you'd come through. Sarah's an idiot for wasting her time playing nurse. At least now I'll have something to show for all those years of family. Dinners." I screenshotted everything, my hands shaking with rage. My father had forged my grandmother's signature. My brother had known about it all along. My mother had probably known too. They had all conspired to steal my inheritance while I was grieving. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated exactly how much evidence they had left behind, and they had no idea what I was capable of when pushed to my limit. That's when I knew exactly what I had to do. I spent the next 3 days gathering evidence like I was preparing for the trial of the century. First, I made copies of everything I had found at Grandma Rose's house. The forged practice sheet, the email exchange between my father and Jake, and my grandmother's original letter stating her true intentions. I stored copies in 3 different locations: my apartment, my best friend's house, and a safety deposit box at the bank. Then I did something that would prove to be the smartest decision of my life. I started recording every conversation I had with my family. See, I had learned something important during my grandmother's illness. When you're dealing with manipulative people, you need documentation. So I bought a small digital recorder and started carrying it everywhere. My first recorded conversation was with my mother. I called her and asked innocently about the will reading. "Mom, I'm still confused about Grandma Rose changing her mind about the house. When did she tell you she wanted Jake to have it instead of me?" My mother's voice was careful. "Oh, honey, it was several months ago. She was worried about you being so young and having to deal with property maintenance." "Several months ago? But I was living with her several months ago. Why didn't she mention it to me?" "Well, you know how she was. Sometimes she didn't want to hurt people's feelings." That was lie number 1, recorded and saved. Next, I called Jake. He was less careful with his words. "Jake, I keep thinking about what Grandma Rose used to say about the house being mine someday. Did she ever say anything to you about changing her mind?" Jake laughed. "Sarah, come on. Grandma Rose said a lot of things. Old people make promises they can't keep. Besides, you'll be fine. You don't need a big house." But she seemed so certain when she talked to me about it, even up until the end. "Look, sis, Dad explained the whole situation to me months ago. Grandma Rose realized I needed the stability more than you do. You're already successful with your nursing career. Dad explained it to you months ago?" "Yeah, back in October or November. He said Grandma Rose was going to change the will to make things more fair." October or November. But according to Mr. Peterson, the will wasn't changed until September, and my father claimed it was my grandmother's sudden decision. That was lie number 2, and Jake had just admitted that Dad had planned this months in advance. My most important recording session was with my father. I invited him to lunch and asked him to explain the will situation, because I was having trouble accepting it. "Dad, I just need to understand what happened. Grandma Rose was so definite about wanting me to have the house. What made her change her mind?" My father put on his most sympathetic voice. "Sarah, I know this is hard, But your grandmother's mental state wasn't great toward the end. The medication made her confused. When she came to me in September, she was worried that she had made promises she couldn't keep. She came to you in September? Yes, she called me one morning, very upset. She said she had been thinking about the inheritance and realized it wasn't fair to burden you with such a big responsibility. She asked me to help her change the will. And you went with her to the lawyer? Of course. She needed support making such a big decision. This was the biggest lie of all. I had been living with my grandmother in September. She had never called my father upset about the will. In fact, she had mentioned the house being mine at least a dozen times in September, always with certainty and joy. But now I had him on record claiming that she had contacted him to change her mind, when I knew for a fact that she had done no such thing. While I was gathering evidence, I was also researching my legal options. I learned about something called undue influence, when someone manipulates a vulnerable person into changing their will. I also learned about forgery laws and inheritance fraud. I consulted with 3 different lawyers. 2 of them said it would be difficult to prove without the living testimony of my grandmother. But the 3rd lawyer, a sharp woman named Margaret Collins, was more optimistic. Sarah, if you can prove that your father forged your grandmother's signature and manipulated her into changing the will, this could be considered inheritance fraud. The penalties are severe, both civil and criminal. What kind of penalties? Well, civilly, they would have to return the property and could be liable for additional damages. Criminally, forgery and fraud can result in felony charges, fines, and even jail time. I hired Margaret Collins that day, but I wasn't done gathering evidence. I needed one more piece of the puzzle. I remembered that my grandmother had a close friend, Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door. If anyone would know about my grandmother's true intentions, it would be her. I visited Mrs. Patterson the next evening. She invited me in for tea and immediately started talking about how much she missed my grandmother. Your grandmother talked about you constantly, dear. She was so proud of you for taking care of her. Mrs. Patterson, did my grandmother ever mention anything to you about changing her will or having second thoughts about leaving me the house? Mrs. Patterson looked puzzled. Changing her will? Goodness, no. Right up until the end, she talked about how excited she was for you to inherit the house. She had so many plans for things she wanted to show you about maintaining the garden. Even in September and October? Especially then. She said once you finished nursing school, you'd need a proper home to start your life. She never had any doubts about that decision, sweetheart. I asked Mrs. Patterson if she would be willing to provide a written statement about my grandmother's intentions. She agreed immediately. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed: proof of forgery, the practice sheet, evidence of conspiracy, the email exchange, recorded admissions of lies from all 3 family members, documentation of my grandmother's true wishes, her letter and Mrs. Patterson's statement, legal representation, a clear understanding of exactly what laws my family had broken. Jake had already moved into the house and was planning to sell some of my grandmother's antique furniture to make the place more modern. They thought they had won. They thought I was just going to accept this betrayal and move on with my life. They had no idea that their little nursing student had just built an airtight legal case that was about to destroy their lives. The confrontation was going to be epic. I called another family meeting for the following Sunday. I told everyone I wanted to discuss moving forward as a family, and that I had some things to say about the inheritance situation. They probably thought I was going to apologize for being difficult and accept their decision gracefully. They were so wrong. I arrived at my parents' house with a briefcase full of evidence and my lawyer's business card in my pocket. My whole family was there: Mom, Dad, Jake, Uncle Tom, and Aunt Linda. They were all sitting around the living room with coffee and pastries, looking relaxed and satisfied. "Thanks for coming, everyone," I said, taking a seat in the center of the room. "I know the last few weeks have been difficult, and I wanted to clear the air about some things." My mother smiled warmly. Of course, honey. We're family. You're right, Mom. We are family. And that's why what I discovered is so incredibly disappointing. The mood in the room shifted slightly. My father leaned forward. What do you mean, Sarah? I opened my briefcase and pulled out the first document, the handwriting practice sheet. Well, Dad, I found something interesting when I went through Grandma Rose's desk. I held up the paper. It looks like someone was practicing her signature, a lot. The color drained from my father's face. I don't know what that is, he said quickly. Really? Because it has your handwriting at the bottom. Right here where it says Rose Marie Thompson wishes to leave her house to her grandson Jake Thompson. Jake started to stand up. Sarah, what are you trying to say? Sit down, Jake. I'm not finished. My voice had a steel edge to it that I had never heard before. I'm saying that Dad forged Grandma Rose's signature on a document that changed her will. The room erupted, in protests and denials, but I raised my voice over them. I have proof, I shouted. I have the practice sheet with Dad's handwriting. I have the original letter from Grandma Rose stating her true intentions. And I have this. I pulled out my phone and played the recording of my father claiming that Grandma Rose had called him in September, asking to change the will. That's Dad on recording, lying about Grandma Rose contacting him to change her will. But I was living with her in September. She never made that call. She never had doubts. Dad made it all up. My father was sweating now. Sarah, you're misunderstanding the situation. Am I? Because I also have this. I pulled out the printed email exchange between my father and Jake. I read Jake's email aloud. Thanks, Dad. I knew you'd come through. Sarah's an idiot for wasting her time playing nurse. At least now I'll have something to show for all those years of family dinners. Jake's face went white. Where did you get that? From Grandma Rose's computer. You left quite a trail, brother. Uncle Tom tried to intervene. Sarah, even if there were some irregularities, your grandmother is gone. We can't know what she really wanted. Actually, we can. I pulled out Mrs. Patterson's written statement. Mrs. Patterson was Grandma Rose's closest friend. She spoke with her regularly right up until the end. According to her statement, Grandma Rose never wavered in her intention to leave me the house. She was excited about it. The room was dead silent now. I've also spoken with Mr. Peterson, the lawyer who handled the will. He's confirmed that Dad accompanied Grandma Rose to the appointment where she supposedly changed her mind. He's also confirmed that the handwritten note requesting the change seemed unusually neat for someone with advanced arthritis. My mother finally spoke up. Sarah, what do you want from us? What do I want? I stood up and I felt 10 feet tall. I want justice. I want what my grandmother intended me to have. And I want consequences for the people who thought they could manipulate a dying woman and steal from her granddaughter. I pulled out Margaret Collins' business card. This is my lawyer. Tomorrow morning she's filing a lawsuit against all of you for inheritance fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Dad, you're looking at potential felony charges. Jake, since you knowingly participated in fraud, you're an accessory. And Mom, Uncle Tom, Aunt Linda, since you all knew about the scheme and helped cover it up, you're all liable for civil damages. The protest started again, but I wasn't finished. The penalties for inheritance fraud in this state include returning the stolen property, paying treble damages, and covering all legal costs. That means Jake doesn't just lose the house. You all could end up owing me triple the value of everything. Grandma Rose left. Jake was on his feet now. You can't prove any of this. I laughed, and it wasn't a nice sound. I have your emails admitting to the conspiracy. I have Dad's handwriting practice sheet. I have recorded admissions from all of you. I have witness testimony about Grandma Rose's true intentions. I have the lawyer's statement about the suspicious circumstances of the will change. I looked around the room at my family, the people who had raised me, who I had trusted completely. You know what the saddest part is? If you had just honored Grandma Rose's wishes, we could have all stayed a family. Jake could have visited the house any time. We could have shared holidays there. But instead, you chose greed over family. You chose to manipulate a dying woman and steal from her granddaughter. My father tried one last desperate attempt. Sarah, be reasonable. We can work something out. Maybe Jake could sell the house and split the proceeds with you. No. My voice was calm now, but deadly serious. You had your chance to be reasonable. You had months to tell me the truth. Instead, you let me find out by accident. And only because you were too arrogant to cover your tracks properly. I packed up my evidence and headed for the door. My lawyer will be in touch. Jake, I'd start looking for a new place to live. The judge is going to order you out of that house within 30 days. As I reached the door, I turned back one more time. Oh, and Jake? Next time you want to call someone an idiot for wasting their time playing nurse, make sure you delete your emails first, because this idiot just destroyed your entire plan. The silence behind me was deafening, but the real justice was just beginning. The lawsuit moved faster than I expected. When you have recorded confessions, forged documents, and email evidence of conspiracy, lawyers tend to get very excited about your case. Margaret Collins filed the papers on Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, my family's lawyer was calling to discuss settlement options. They want to settle? I asked Margaret during our phone call. Oh yes, very badly. Your father's lawyer made it clear that they understand the criminal implications of taking this to trial. Forgery and inheritance fraud are serious felony charges. What are they offering? Full return of the house, all property taxes paid, all of your grandmother's possessions returned, plus $50,000 in damages for your pain and suffering. I was quiet for a moment. What do you think I should do? Honestly, I think we could get more if we go to trial. But settlements have advantages. They're faster, guaranteed, and they avoid the stress of a public trial. What about the criminal charges? That's separate from our civil case. The district attorney will decide whether to pursue criminal charges based on the evidence we've provided. I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. I want the house back. I want all of Grandma Rose's things back, and I want them to pay my legal fees. But I don't want their money. Sarah, they owe you damages for what they put you through. I know, but I don't want to profit from this nightmare. I just want what was rightfully mine in the first place. We settled the following week. Jake had to move out of the house immediately. All of my grandmother's possessions that he had moved or altered had to be returned to their original locations. My parents had to pay all legal fees and court costs. But the real justice came from the criminal investigation. The district attorney decided to pursue charges against my father for forgery and fraud. The case made the local news. Local man charged with forging mother-in-law's will. My father ended up pleading guilty to avoid a trial. He got 2 years probation, community service, and a permanent felony record. He also had to pay restitution to cover the cost of the investigation. Jake wasn't charged criminally, but the civil judgment meant he was financially responsible for part of the legal costs. For someone who had never held a steady job, a $5,000 legal bill was devastating. The family consequences were even more satisfying than the legal ones. Uncle Tom and Aunt Linda stopped speaking to my parents entirely. They were humiliated that their family name had been in the news associated with fraud charges. Aunt Linda actually called me to apologize and ask if there was anything she could do to make amends. My mother tried to salvage the situation by claiming she had been misled by her husband and didn't know the full extent of the plan. But the recorded conversations I had proved she was lying about that too. Jake had to move back in with my parents because he couldn't afford his own place anymore. The 30-year-old man who thought he was going to inherit a house was back in his childhood bedroom, depending on his parents for everything. My father's reputation in the community was destroyed. He had to resign from the church board and the local business association. Neighbors who had known him for 20 years crossed the street to avoid talking to him. But the most satisfying moment came 3 months later. I was at the grocery store when I ran into Jake in the cereal aisle. He looked terrible, like he hadn't been sleeping well. When he saw me, he actually tried to hide behind a display of cornflakes. "Hello, Jake," I said pleasantly. He mumbled something that might have been hello. "How's the job search going?" His face turned red. It's hard with Dad's situation. Making the news. Some employers won't even interview me because of the family connection. "That's unfortunate," I said, though I didn't sound particularly sympathetic. "Sarah, look, I'm sorry about how everything went down. I never meant for it to get so complicated." I looked at my brother, really looked at him. He was pathetic. A grown man who had been willing to defraud his own grandmother and steal from his sister, and now he wanted sympathy because there were consequences. "Jake, you called me an idiot for taking care of Grandma Rose. You said I wasted my time playing nurse. You participated in forging her signature and stealing my inheritance. The only thing you're sorry about is getting caught." He couldn't meet my eyes. "But I want you to know something," I continued. "Living in Grandma Rose's house, surrounded by her things, remembering her stories every day, it's exactly as wonderful as she always told me it would be. She would be so proud that justice was served." I left him standing there in the cereal aisle and walked away. That evening, I sat on my grandmother's porch swing, my porch swing now, and reflected on everything that had happened. The house was exactly as she had wanted me to have it. I had restored her garden, kept her recipes, and preserved all the family stories she had shared with me. Every morning when I made coffee in her kitchen, I felt her presence and her love. My family had tried to steal that from me. They had tried to erase my grandmother's wishes and rob me of my inheritance, but they underestimated the granddaughter who had learned strength and determination from Rosemarie Thompson herself. Justice wasn't just served, it was served exactly as my grandmother would have wanted it. A year later, my life was completely transformed. I finished nursing school with honors and got a job at the best hospital in our city. Every morning, I woke up in my grandmother's house, my house, and felt grateful for the peace and stability it provided. I had learned so much about myself during those months of fighting for justice. I discovered that I was stronger than I ever imagined, more determined than my family gave me credit for, and absolutely unwilling to accept being treated as less valuable than others. The inheritance battle taught me the most important lesson of my life. Never let anyone convince you that you deserve less than what you've earned. My grandmother had seen my worth when no one else did. She recognized that love, loyalty, and sacrifice should be rewarded, not exploited. I learned to set boundaries with toxic family members. I learned that being the responsible one doesn't mean being a doormat. I learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones most willing to take advantage of your kindness. My relationship with my parents never recovered, and honestly, I was okay with that. They had shown me who they really were when they thought they could get away with it. My father still had a felony record that would follow him for the rest of his life. My mother lost the daughter she had raised to be compliant and grateful, for scraps. Jake eventually found a job at a warehouse, but he never got over losing what he thought was his guaranteed inheritance. He still lived with our parents, still blamed everyone but himself for his problems. The most healing part of my new life was connecting with Mrs. Patterson, my grandmother's neighbor. She became like a surrogate grandmother to me, sharing stories about my grandmother that I had never heard before. Through her, I learned that my grandmother had always worried about my family taking advantage of my kindness. She used to say you were too good for your own good, Mrs. Patterson told me one afternoon as we worked in the garden together. She wanted to make sure you had something that no one could take away from you. 6 months after the settlement, I got a letter from a cousin I barely knew, my grandmother's sister's granddaughter, who lived across the country. She had heard about the inheritance dispute through family gossip. "I wanted you to know," she wrote, "that your grandmother talked about you constantly when I visited her 2 summers ago. She showed me every room in that house and explained how she was leaving it to the granddaughter who chose love over convenience. She was so proud of you for taking care of her." That letter meant more to me than any legal victory. I started hosting holidays at the house, not for my parents or Jake, but for the family members who had supported me and for friends who had become my chosen family. Mrs. Patterson always came, along with some of my nursing school classmates and colleagues from the hospital. The house that was supposed to divide our family became the center of a new, healthier family built on respect and genuine care. I also used my experience to help other people facing similar situations. I volunteered with a legal aid organization that helps elderly people protect themselves from family financial abuse. Inheritance fraud is more common than most people realize, and my story became a resource for other victims. 1 year after moving into my grandmother's house, I planted a rose garden in her memory. As I worked in the soil, I thought about the lessons she had taught me, not just about gardening, but about standing up for yourself and never accepting less than you deserve. The woman who had been dismissed as a naive nursing student had become someone who refused to be underestimated. The granddaughter who was supposed to accept financial scraps had claimed her full inheritance and her dignity. But most importantly, I had honored the woman who loved me enough to ensure I would have a foundation for my future, even when she was no longer there to protect me. That's what real family does for each other. That's what love looks like in action. And that's a legacy worth fighting for. Looking back on this entire experience, I realized that my grandmother's greatest gift wasn't just the house. It was teaching me that I had the strength to fight for what was right. She knew that someday I would need to stand up to people who tried to take advantage of my kindness, and she made sure I had both the resources and the motivation to do it. The most shocking part of this whole story wasn't the forgery or the lies. It was discovering that the family members I trusted most were capable of such calculated cruelty. But what surprised me even more was learning that I was capable of such strategic determination when pushed to my limit. Which part of my story surprised you the most? Was it the evidence I found? The way my family conspired against me? Or how I fought back? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories about standing up to toxic family members and claiming what's rightfully yours. Remember, you are worth more than what others are willing to give you. Never accept less than you deserve.